Hi, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. This session will be about Google Analytics. Originally, the title of the session was introducing Google Analytics App+Web, but it has changed because in between the planning of the session and today, Google Analytics 4 actually launched on October 14th, all right? So what was previously known as Google Analytics App+Web is now known as Google Analytics 4, all right? So they've just rebranded it and made it an official launch on October 14th, all right? So this session for today, actually I had to change it a little bit. Previously, it was a bit highlighting a lot of the differences between the previous Google Analytics and the current one. But knowing the wide range of attendees for today, I'm going to gear it more towards a setup walkthrough, all right, towards the end, so that it can guide everyone to start using this, irrespective of whether you have used this before or not, all right? So if you look at Google Analytics, so this is the agenda for today. We're going to talk about what this whole analytics thing is about as far as Google is concerned. What is exactly GA4, and then how to set up. Okay, and I will spend the majority of my time here in the how to set up session to walk through all the various ways you can start using GA4 right now, depending on your exact circumstances, all right? So if you look at why Google is in the analytics place, in the analytics space in the first place, all right? So the story here is that many people use a lot of touch points. Okay, so a touch point in this case is online areas where you interact with a brand, all right? So this could be your website, this could be your app, this could be a YouTube ad, a video, correct? It could be something that you post on Facebook. So all these are various touch points. And this is a study that they did for car leasing, for example. The number of touch points that a user actually, a potential customer actually interacts with before they actually end up leasing a car, all right? And these touch points tend to cross devices. So when you mean cross devices, you could be looking at it from your office laptop, you could be looking at it from your mobile phone, etc. So that's considered cross device. And cross platform, you could be using an app, you could be using a website. All right. So the whole key thing here that everyone is trying to hop on is this concept of omni-channel, right? Which means the same person is actually interacting with you across multiple channels. So the term that they use is omni-channel. So, and because of this, the so-called lines between web and app is starting to blur, all right? So many companies, many startups, etc., tend to launch with both a web and app, all right? But you may be doing different things on the web and app, but the web may be more for marketing. The app may be more for consumption, but in the sense that you have multiple touch points and you expect your users to be reaching across all these different touch points, all right, at different parts of the user life cycle, right? So what you need to do, and then of course the industry right now is all about privacy, etc., and all that. So all this comes together, and you want to track all this activity, right? So that's what analytics is about. It's about tracking all this activity, and this is the kind of things, the challenges that Google Analytics is trying to tackle, all right, for this next generation of analytics tools. So I think this one is just a whole bunch of surveys on basically what marketing people are looking for. They're all looking for this so-called holistic view of consumers, all right? And this is, of course, a wish. I'm not going to tell you right now that Google Analytics has this solved. In fact, this is getting harder and harder to achieve realistically because of the increased attention towards privacy all over the world. So this is actually getting harder and harder to achieve. But of course, this is what people want to see from the brand perspective, all right? From the company perspective. As a user, of course, you prefer to have privacy, but that's on the other side. Then, of course, the other side, people are starting to expect that the analytics tools embed some form of machine learning so that it can generate predictions and analysis automatically as opposed to being eyeball. We like to call it eyeball, which means a human being looks at the data and then tries to derive conclusions, all right? So once again, this is on the wish list for the next generation. Right now, machine learning for analysis is still largely, it's okay, but it's still not as good sometimes as the human being looking at the data, all right? And lastly, the other wish list that people have is the ability to actually apply that data back to the tools, all right? So this can be stuff like, okay, I want to apply what I know about my data to modify my advertising, all right? I want to apply my data to modify the way I sell ads or buy ads, etc. So this is integration from analytics to the tools where you take action, all right? So these are the three wish lists that people have generally for the new generation of analytics tools, all right? And that's what GA4 is trying to be, and it's going to take a while to get there, to be honest with it, all right? So what is GA4 right now, okay? It used to be known as Google Analytics App+Web because that was the beta name for this. And the idea was to combine app data and web data into a single place. They've since rebranded this into a much better name, in my opinion, called Google Analytics 4, all right? So why is it Google Analytics 4? If you follow the history of Google Analytics, the version that we've all been using for quite a while right now, this universal analytics, as they like to call it, it was actually Google Analytics 3, although no one branded it as such, all right? Google Analytics actually started all the way back from 2006, and that's where version 1 was actually created, right? So right now we are actually here, where version 4 is starting to be launched, all right? And what is the so-called benefit of App+Web properties? They are trying to make it more scalable. One of the things complaints on the old GA was that it was not fast enough, and it couldn't match the kind of volumes that some people are looking at. Second thing is, of course, the environment is changing. A lot more privacy things coming into play. They want to introduce more machine learning, and they want to be able to activate your data. Activate your data is a keyword for saying you want to pass that data to places where you take action, all right? So once again, that could be Google Ads, that could be your ad manager, that could be your campaign manager, that could be any other places where you take action on the data, all right? Okay, so the idea between app and web is this, it's just basically this, Google Analytics 4. You are trying to unify a view across your app and your websites, all right? So if you note this, what happens is, if I go back, I'm gonna go back a little bit. Google Analytics actually launched something quite confusing in the last 3 years, where they launched this thing called Firebase, all right? So any of you who are involved with apps, you would know this quite intimately. So Firebase has been used a lot for apps, especially Android apps right now, all right? So this has been launched, and this Firebase actually included analytics features, all right? So this App+Web or GA4 is basically a combination of Google Analytics for web and your Google Analytics for Firebase, all right, which is the app side. So the good news here is that you don't have to throw away anything you've done for Firebase. So anyone who is done work on Firebase, who has released apps on Firebase and so forth, all that work is not wasted. This entire thing is built on top of that, all right? So from the app side, it is just basically Google Analytics for Firebase. The change is happening on the website, all right, where there's a new change here on the Google Analytics for web. All right, so this is where it addresses this. There's a new infrastructure for web clients specifically, all right? So if you are using the web-based Google Analytics, there is now a new data collection model, and this is where this could be troublesome, new interface and new functionalities, all right, for anyone who is on the web base. For your apps, it's fine because it's all based on Firebase, all right? So what is the future roadmap? Okay, App+Web is actually very, very fresh. It just got launched like 2 weeks ago, all right? October 14th as GA4. So it's just out of beta. In practice, for people who use it regularly, we kind of still consider it in beta, all right? It's in semi-beta, all right? So if you're on a new site or app, the recommendation is you can go with Google Analytics 4 straight away right now, all right? Because the future roadmap of improvements is all on Google Analytics 4. So if you're starting a new website or a new app, you can just straight away jump into Google Analytics 4 and you don't have to worry about old Google Analytics, all right? But I assume most of the people who are attending this talk are actually existing Google Analytics users, all right? Because you have an existing website or an app. In which case, our recommendation is actually to continue using your current one, all right? Launch of GA4 does not mean that GA3 is no more. GA3 is still standing around. Firebase is still standing around, all right? Google doesn't have any plans to shut down the older version as of right now. It's gonna probably last for quite a long while, at least a couple of years or more, all right? So you are feel free to continue using your current analytics and feel free to continue reporting from your current analytics, all right? What you can start doing is what we call this dual setup, all right? You can start tracking one copy of your data to GA4 and start collecting as soon as possible, all right? But as far as actual reporting goes, you can slowly move your reports over, all right? You don't have to rush that, all right? So that's the future versus right now. All right, existing users, all right? So dual setup, all right? So this is the thing that I'm going to address a lot later on through the walkthroughs. How would you do a dual setup? Essentially, in a nutshell, it means that you will be maintaining two Google Analytics properties. One for the old one, the old Google Analytics property is still there. It's collecting data from your website. And there'll be a new GA4 property also collecting data from your website. So you'll be wondering, does that mean I am duplicating my collection? I'm collecting in two places? That is exactly true, right? That's what dual setup means. It means that the same data is being collected in two places. And that's recommended because it's probably the safest way for existing users to move to GA4. Because if you try and stop your current one and start the new one, then you'll be facing a lot of issues where why the data not the same, why I used to track this but now it's missing, etc. Correct? So you're not recommended, because it's quite different, you're not recommended to immediately jump. All right, you're recommended to do a dual setup. All right, so if you want to use the new features, the new use cases, you can go look at the GA4 property. But if you are still doing the existing reporting, you can go back to your old property to do your existing reporting. All right. Then in future, because you're collecting in two sites, maybe 1 year from now, you are ready to transition completely to GA4 reporting. At which point your GA4 already has 1 year's worth of data inside. All right. So this is the existing users dual setup recommendation. And this is actually the same thing that it's a bit of a repeated slide. It gives you early access to all the new features by having GA4 right now. Gives you an opportunity to, of course, review your current strategy and see what other things you wish to track. And the good news with GA4 is that a lot of these integrations, which were previously locked behind premium paid packages, which Google called 360 plan, are now available for free. All right. This includes any integration with what they call Google Marketing Platform products, like search ads, display and video, campaign manager, as well as the data warehouse product, BigQuery. All right. So all these integrations are now free for the GA4 onwards. All right. So that is actually quite interesting for a lot of, I guess, SMEs. All right. Not for guys who are just starting out. Any of you guys who are like in semi-big companies, a lot of times, a lot of people are looking at doing data warehousing and stuff like that already. And usually it was prohibitive because it's expensive, all right? But as of GA4 onwards, they're going to roll all this out for free. Okay, so the next thing over here, how to set up, okay? The dual setup is actually, in theory, is not very difficult. Of course, if you're trying to do a migration of an existing app, there will be some issues. But in theory, the steps are pretty simple. You just have to create your new App+Web GA4 property. Within each property, you can have multiple data streams. Okay, so that's how they manage this combined view. All right, you create one property for your brand. All right, so mystartup.com. Okay, so that's your property. Your mystartup.com has a website, has an Android app, has an iOS app. So each of these are connected to that same property as data streams. All right, that's how they combine things together. All right, then they have this thing called enhanced measurement, where it can actually track simple events like YouTube videos, page scroll, and all that automatically for you. You do not have to do any sort of additional tagging. Some of these are automatically collected. There are a lot more automatically collected events in GA4 compared to the old one where a lot of things were manual. All right, so that's another good thing about GA4. You enable your data collection, and then after that you can link your GA4 to your Google Ads, right? Or whatever other tools that you use from Google that will enable you to use that data for automatic export or etc. All right. So some advanced things you might want to do is consider doing e-commerce measurement if you are like running a WooCommerce store or things like that, or adding any recommended events in addition to what is automatically captured. All right. So this is like the steps where you kind of think through and you go through when you try to when you're looking at GA4 tracking. All right. I will not go all the way until 6 and 7 for today. All right. I'm going to stop somewhere between 4 and 5. All right, for my basic setup. So if there's any questions, let me see whether there's anything on the Q&A. Okay, Google Analytics codes to WP theme. All right, so I think that's a good question as well, because a lot of you guys actually do not code Google Analytics manually yourself, all right? Because you're using WordPress, you're using WooCommerce, etc. You should be using plugins, all right? Do not attempt to code this yourself, all right? Please use existing WordPress plugin. There's an existing good existing Google Analytics plugin on WordPress that's updated very quickly. It's actually open source. It's not even done by Google, but they update it very well. So you can use that, all right? There is a plugin for WooCommerce. There is a plugin for Shopify. There's a plugin for all these commonly used content management systems, as well as e-commerce stores. So please use the plugins, okay? All right. So assuming you are doing that, I'm going to go through a basic setup walkthrough. Let me know if my screen does not translate, because I'm going to tab away from my PowerPoint to go through with a live walkthrough. All right. I'm going to look at 3 different circumstances, okay, that you may face. The first one is web with G tag, which is the one that you will encounter if you are using things like WordPress or things, any other pre-packaged system with a plugin for Google Analytics. Most likely you will be doing this, all right? Why is it this one? Because there's actually multiple ways to put Google Analytics onto your website. If you want to look at it from a developer perspective, there's multiple ways. But the latest approach is this thing called a G tag. All right. And most of the plugins, if you take the latest versions or the new versions, are all using G tag already. G tag has been introduced like almost 2 years, 1.5 years already. So most of the plugins are already using G tag. All right. So this would be the most common way for you to use Google Analytics. All right. So if you're using this way, you just have to go to analytics.google.com. All right. This is the only place you need to go to. This is the actual Google Analytics reporting interface. And I'm going to tap over there right now. Okay, so this is analytics.google.com. This is a very complex looking version because this is my live GA4 property, all right? So this is how a live GA4 property looks like. For those of you who are familiar with Google Analytics, this is actually quite alarming because you will notice it looks very different from what you're used to, all right? All the reports on the left-hand side, how it looks like on the right-hand side has all changed, all right? So for anyone who comes from the old Google Analytics, this is actually quite alarming. The entire interface has changed, which is why the dual setup is so highly recommended, because if you use this one immediately, confusion will reign, all right? Attempting to educate all the reporting users to use this new thing is a pain, all right? So do not rush into migration if you're using the old Google Analytics. It's very hard to get reporting people who are rushing for time most of the time to get their reports up fast to try to learn a new interface, all right? So do start collecting data into your new GA4 property like me over here, but slowly transition the reporting, all right? So what do you do if, on the other hand, you don't have an existing one like me here, all right? So if you don't have an existing one, actually you are empty, correct? So what happens here is you have an account. You have created an account. When you log into analytics.google.com, they'll ask you to create an account. And in this case, I created with my company name called Kasatria. Right? So when you first come in, you will have no property. All right. So I'm going to simulate creating a property for you. All right. So within one account, you can have many properties, which are supposed to represent the different sites and things that you could own under your brand. So if you create a property here, this is the new interface for creating a property, because we are trying to create a Google Analytics 4 property. All right. You can actually change an advanced option here and create an old property. Old property is called a universal analytics property, right? So this is for people who still want to create the old property. You're still allowed to do so, all right? It's just hidden under advanced option right now, okay? But if you want to create, by now, by default, you're creating a Google Analytics 4 property. I'm going to call it Kasatria Training 2020, 110, 27 days for today, all right? So the most important thing is actually the time zone. You don't have many opportunities to fix this. So please make sure you choose the correct time zone, because the entire, all your date range and time and everything in your reports is based on this time zone, all right? So of course, if you are a global business, all your reports are based on this time zone that you set, all right? Then you have to do your own translation in your mind of how this time zone interacts with the rest of your global business, right? Similar with currency as well. I'm going to go with Malaysian ringgit. It also all translates into this specific currency. Okay, then you click next. We ask you, nowadays it asks you more questions. Actually, these are all optional. If you put in the wrong thing, they are not going to audit you, right? You can just put in whatever you like. They just want to do a survey of their customers, right? So I'm using this for this, and I'm going to create. Okay, so I've created this new property. It says Kasatria Training 2020 1027. Okay, if you look at the property settings, it dropped me straight into data streams, all right? Where it asked me to start setting up a data stream. But before I start setting up a data stream, let me look at property settings to show you how it looks like. So this was my property name. This was what I filled in just now, my time zone, etc. Correct? And this is my property ID. Okay, so you can see it looks kind of different for those of you who are familiar with Google Analytics. Last time, the Google Analytics used to have the property ID used to look like UA-1111-2 or something like that. Now it looks like this, all right? So when you see a different format, you know, this is GA4, all right? It's quite clear. And then once you go into data set streams over here, you get a choice. You want to set up a stream for iOS, Android, or website, all right? So in this case, if you're going through this particular way, which I'm demonstrating here, is for website. Because if you're doing for iOS and Android, you can do it like this, but I don't recommend it. There's an easier way to set up if you're doing for iOS and Android, which I will show you in the next walkthrough. So if this particular approach is recommended if you're doing for website, all right? So I'm going to click web over here. So you ask you for the website URL, all right? So I'm going to type in my website URL. You ask you for HTTPS or HTTP. For your sake, I will hope that your website is on HTTPS. At this day and age, right now, there's no reason to be not on HTTPS, all right? So it's HTTPS and kasatria.com. So this is, I usually just type my kasatria.com here again, just to make it easier to read. So here they ask you, do you want to turn on enhanced measurement, correct? So this is the thing that is new for GA4. And that's what I was talking about as well. These things are auto-tracked. So remember the old Google Analytics page views were always auto-tracked. Now they are also auto-tracking scrolls, outbound clicks, site search, video engagement only for YouTube. Don't expect Facebook video or anything else like that. Only YouTube when they say video engagement, and file downloads. All right. So these are all auto-tracked as well under GA4. All right. So just turn it on. There's no harm in it. All right. So I'm going to create a stream. And this is a created stream, all right? So there's a few ways for you to put this on your website, all right? So note that this is the measurement ID, okay? And it's G dash something. And this is actually the most important ID, okay? If you go into any plugins or anything, and they ask you to put an ID, actually they are looking for this ID, all right? This measurement ID is the most important ID. It means it represents this web stream that you have created, all right? So take note of this measurement ID, okay? Now they have a few things. They tell you, how do you want to implement this on your website? Do you want to use G-Tag or do you want to use Google Tag Manager? I will go through Google Tag Manager in my second run through. First run through is G-Tag, all right? So G-Tag, the first option is this. You can copy this and paste it on your head of your web page. This is, of course, if you're not using something like WordPress, you're manually developing your web page, then I would recommend you copy this and you paste it on the head of the web page and you're done. All right. So if you're literally building your own website, this is what you do. All right. If you are doing this with a plugin on WordPress, etc., then what the plugin would already have this. Okay, the plugin will have a so-called G tag. That you have a Google Analytics plugin on WordPress using G tag. So all this code would already be there. So usually when you put that plugin, they just ask you what is your measurement ID. All right, you just copy this measurement ID, and then you paste this into the text box where they ask you to put in the measurement ID. All right. So if you are a developer, I think you know what happens. The plugin actually generates all this code, and it takes whatever you put into the text box, this thing, and then you insert it in the correct places here. That's all it does. All right. So if you're using a plugin, you just copy this and you paste it in the relevant dialog box in the administration of the plugin. All right. So that is how you would put this GA4 onto your website. All right. So far, hopefully that makes sense. Not too confusing. Okay. What happens if you already have an existing Google Analytics on your website? Correct. So this one, I'm always talking, they are talking like a fresh website. So you can start fresh. It's very easy, correct? What happens if you already have an existing GA? What do you do then? Do you want to reset the whole plugin, install a new plugin, or do this kind of thing? Isn't it very troublesome? Okay, so there is a better way to do that. That's called use existing on page tag. All right, so there's this option for use existing on page tag. You open this here, and it will actually teach you how to do it. All right. These are the actual instructions. I will walk through you how to do it. All right. This is the I'm actually just repeating what they spelled out here in this particular block of text. Okay. How you would do it is if you have an existing property. So in this case, I have an existing property here for Kasatria. All right. So this is my existing old property for my website. And it's already working. It's already tracking my website. So you can notice it's the old property. The left-hand side looks like this. This is what all of you who are using Google Analytics are familiar with. This is how the left-hand side looks like. This is my existing property and it's already tracking, correct? So if I want to pipe this into my new GA4 property, I'll just go to admin. Based on the instructions just now, I will say tracking info, tracking code. Under this thing, there's this thing called connected site tags. All right, I'm going to click on this. Actually, they should have made this a bit friendlier to use. It's a bit hard to find, all right? So just to double reiterate, it's under your admin, tracking info, click on it, click one more time to tracking code. That's why the instructions was there in that block of text, all right? And then you have to look for this thing called connected site tags, all right? Click on this one more time, and then enter the ID of the tag to connect, which is the ID that we created just now. All right, this was the measurement ID. So this is my Kasatria training 2020, 10, 27. So what this in fact does is it connects your existing data here on this existing property to that new property. Does that make sense? All right. So Google is duplicating the data on your behalf. All right. So that's what this connection literally does. You connected. All right. So now when you go back, it says, if you come back here to your tracking code, you can see that it's connected. There is now a connected. It's now connected. All right. So if I go back to my Kasatria training one over here, and I go to my administration, and I go to my data streams, you can see the web is here. Of course, no data received because it only starts receiving right now after I made the connection. So you need some time before it starts recording the data. So it does not record historical data. That's the bad thing here, right? It will not backfill for you all history. You only start collecting from this point onwards, which is a big complaint to Google. But they are not looking to address it as of right now, because I think it's too much for them to process. So as of right now, they have no promises that they will ever do backfill, all right, of historical. So it's only going to be capturing from this point onwards, all right? So you can see that it's already streamed and there is connected site tags over here. Oh, actually they haven't connected yet. Oh, no, this one is to connect to another one, correct? So this one is already connected, yes. So that is how you would connect an existing GA property to your current, to your new GA4 property that you have created. All right. But this only works, of course, there's a bit of another caveat as well. This only works if your old property here was implemented with GTag, all right? Unfortunately, if you are using the older version of tagging, which was called GA tag, the old GA tag, it doesn't work at all right? That is another unfortunate thing for the upgrade path. If you're using the old GA tag and not G tag, you are actually in trouble, all right? The old GA tag will continue to work, but it won't support GA4. You actually have to upgrade your tags on the website to the G tag before this works, all right? So if you're, of course, if you're using plugins, you just have to update to the latest plugin, all right? The latest WordPress plugin would use GTag, all right? So if you're coding this by hand, manually, then of course, you are now in problem, lah. Okay, so unfortunately, there's no recourse for that. You have to upgrade it to GTag, all right? So that is the story for this GA4 upgrade, all right? Any questions do you guys have on the Q&A before I move on to the next scenario? Any questions? Okay, no questions, huh? Okay, and you can type into the Q&A if you do. What about putting GTag old one and new one side by side? Okay, this is possible. This is possible, all right? You can actually, if you are manually coding, yes, you can do this. So what you do is this, all right? So let's look at your GTag, right? So this is a stream. If you're manually coding this, you would have this on the head of every web page, all right? So right now, you would actually have GTag config, and then here, instead of G something something, you will have UA dash something something, which is your old ID, all right? So you just can add another line below that and says GTag config G something something. Then your GTag will send to both, all right? That is doing it from a developer side. You can put 2 lines of code there and it will send to both the UA and the G, all right? Which is version 3 and version 4. All right, instead of connecting using the admin panel, which is what I showed, you can literally put 2 lines in your GTag if you are manually coding. All right, of course, if you are doing via plugin, that might not be possible because plugins usually don't give you that many options. All right, depends on the specific plugin that you're using. All right, so of course, if, as I said, if you're using plugin, you don't even have to bother with this, correct? If you're using plugin, you just connect your old property to the new property, as I just mentioned, all right? But if you're coding manually by hand, yes, you can do it this way.
Hello.
Yes. Hi. What is it? Are you asking about the if I've created GA but not yet activate on the newly developed website? If that is the question, yes. So if you have already created GA, have you created a GA4 property or a GA3 property? If you have created a GA3 property, I would recommend that you straight away just create GA4. Get a new data stream like this. When you create a GA4, you create a new property like this. Create a new data stream like what I did just now. And then get this new GID and then put this on your website. I would recommend doing this if you have not activated your GA3 because there is no point for you to have this dual tracking if you're on a brand new website with brand new tracking, all right? Of course, if you still insist on doing that, maybe because management asked, that's why I guess you asked that question, then of course you can continue doing your GA3, all right? So how do you do GA3? Just to refresh memory of people who may not be familiar. You can persist since you've already started on your GA3. Management prefers to see GA3 anyway, or maybe they sign off on it. You can just continue doing GA3. So GA3 asks you to put your site tag like this, correct? So you would do your G tag on your website and you will config the UA dash like this. Okay, so then you will start collecting data in your GA3 property over here. After that, you can just connect it to your GA4 property, like what I did just now. You go to your connected site tags over here, and then you connect your GA4 property. All right. You can do it this way as well. You have different approaches. All right. Either approach will work. Does that make sense? All right. So the key thing here is to use this G tag. All right. So if you are on G tag, everything is fine. All right. There is this old version. Let me try and look for you. So this is, I forgot to prepare it in my slides before this. There is this version of called analytics.js. So if you are using this version of the script on your current website, then you are in trouble. Then you cannot go with GA4. You're stuck with GA3. All right. Until you actually move to this G tag. If you're on G tag, it's very simple to move between GA3 and GA4. All right. But if you're on this version of the tag, notice the difference. This one says GA open bracket. This one says G tag open bracket. All right. So this version is all fine. All right. This version with the GA bracket, this one, you have no option for using GA4 unless you move this to G tag. Does that make sense? All right. So this is for anyone doing manual coding. As I reiterate a few times already, if you are doing plugins, just update your plugin. All right. The plugin will make sure that it moves from the old code to the new code. All right. So manual coding is the one where you have to handle the code yourself. All right. So let me, if no questions for this part, if there are questions, do feel free to put in the Q&A. I will move on to my next topic, which is how to do it if you're using Google Tag Manager. All right. So there are some people who use Google Tag Manager, and it is recommended for a lot of big businesses because it helps you manage Facebook, helps you manage Google Tags, Google Ads, etc., Adobe Tags, etc. All right. So a lot of big companies use Tag Manager. All right. So if you're on Tag Manager, you would have this is the Tag Manager interface. All right. And you will create your account as per normal, and then you will create a container. All right. So my container here I created is test.com. All right. Of course, in your case, please name it properly. So when you have a container,
Choong,
yes.
Just to interject here, could you be a dear and wrap things up in about 5 minutes?
Sure,
We're running just a little bit over time.
Can. All right. So
All right, thank you.
if you're on Tag Manager, it's not too challenging as well. You would have embedded this Tag Manager code onto your website. All right. So to support dual setup, what you have is you probably have an existing one. This is the old one called Universal Analytics. All right. And this would have been this will be tracked to your UA ID, which is your GA3. All right. And this will be tracked to all pages. All right. So for any of you guys who are using Google Tag Manager, you probably already have this setup. All right. So to set up for GA4 is actually very simple. You just have to create another tag, select GA4 configuration over here, put in the GID that I pasted just now. This is your GID. Set it to all pages as well and save it. All right, now you are dual tracking on Tag Manager. One to the old, one to the new. All right, so I think this part I don't have to dwell on that. The last one here is if you're on Firebase. All right, so for those of you guys who are app developers, you're all doing on Firebase. All right, so Firebase is the platform that Google encourages you to use for all your apps. All right, so for those of you guys who are doing apps, this is how you do it. So you would create a Firebase project. All right. As you create your Firebase project, there's actually this toggle here to enable Google Analytics for this project. They used to call this Firebase Analytics. Now they've renamed everything. They made sure everything is consistent. All right. So when you are enabling analytics on your Firebase, you're actually turning on Google Analytics 4. That's it. All right. There's no magic. Whatever you used to know as Firebase Analytics is actually now Google Analytics 4. All right. So you just continue this, and then you just select the Google Analytics account where you want to place this in. All right. And then you click create project. It will create your Firebase project. It will create the Google Analytics 4 property inside your Google Analytics account. It's all pre-allocated. All right. And then whatever app streams you add later on into your Firebase project, they will all show up on your Google Analytics 4 property. So the app path is actually very much easier. All right. Because the whole thing here is to make combined app and web. It's actually the app. It's actually always more difficult on the app side. app developers have it tougher. So they've made it very easy on the app. They've favored the app, correct? So now that you've created the new Firebase project here, this Firebase project is completely linked to Google Analytics. If I go to the settings here under project, under integration, you can see I have linked it to Google Analytics. When I click manage, the property has been created, the GA4 property. When I click on it, it will bring me to that GA4 property, all right, which is under my Kasatria account that I have been using all this while. It's just that a new property has been created here that was created from Firebase. And everything here is all set up by Firebase. So that's why if you're doing it from the app, I recommend going through the Firebase. All right, don't try to like do it through GA and confuse yourself. From Firebase, you just set everything up and link it, and it's all automated. It's all created. It shows up here in your Google Analytics, and you're all set. All right. So in the interest of time, that's actually the primary purpose of today. I wanted to get through the setup walkthrough. I probably don't have time to go through all these other more advanced topics as I expected. So I'm ending my slides over here. Do you guys have any questions related to setup?
I think even if they do, they can
No
always leave
time.
them in the Q&A box, and we don't
Okay.
have time for that.
Okay.
So, Chee, if you could just answer that at your own time once you go offline, that'd be great.
Can.
So, if
Okay,
you have any
thank you.
questions for him, just leave it in the Q&A box. Chee, I just want to thank you once again for being a part of WebFest Asia 2020. Thanks so much for the great and interactive session, and for really taking the audience along with you. So thank you once again.
Exabytes. Grow your business online.